During a heated congressional hearing, Caroline Leavitt whispered, "Go back to Africa," under her breath, unaware her microphone was still active. What Jasmine Crockett did next stunned the entire chamber and captivated the nation. The atmosphere in the Missouri state capitol was thick with tension, papers rustling, pens clicking, hushed conversations filling the space. The congressional subcommittee hearing on educational reform had stretched into its fourth hour, and patience was wearing thin. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat composed in her navy blazer, having remained mostly silent during the recent exchanges. She wasn't holding back due to lack of opinion, quite the opposite. She was waiting for the right moment, as she always did. Across from her sat Caroline Leavitt, former morning television personality turned senior advisor on federal education policy, sharp-witted, driven, and never one to retreat from confrontation. Today she appeared particularly irritated, defensive. Something about being questioned, especially by a confident black woman, clearly bothered her. When Jasmine finally addressed the room, her voice was controlled yet firm. "What you're implying," she said, looking directly at Caroline, "is that schools in underserved communities simply lack effort?" Caroline shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. "I'm stating that standards must be maintained universally, without compromise. But the playing field was never equal," Jasmine responded steadily. "We cannot discuss equity without acknowledging access. Context is crucial, as is our history." Caroline scoffed softly. Her microphone remained live. That's when it occurred. She leaned slightly sideways, not directly toward the mic, but near enough. Her muttered words came through the speakers clearly, enough to be unmistakable. She should just go back to Africa. A moment of silence followed, then a cough, shuffling papers, someone's sharp intake of breath from the back. The comment didn't immediately register until a black intern at the media table tensed, slowly turning toward the speakers. C-SPAN's live feed captured everything. People expected Jasmine to react, to stand, leave, or respond forcefully. Instead, she remained seated, hands folded, blinking slowly. She waited. The subcommittee chair, an elderly gentleman from Wyoming, cleared his throat. "Let's maintain focus, please." Caroline didn't react. She reached for her water bottle and drank as if nothing occurred, though her flushed ears revealed she knew the microphone had captured her words. Jasmine looked directly at her, not with anger or hurt, but with steady composure. Her expression conveyed, "You believe you've wounded me, but you've only revealed your true character to everyone watching." Still, she remained silent. She returned to her notepad, made a brief notation, and allowed the session to continue normally. That moment, those few seconds, communicated more than any speech could have, but silence doesn't remain silent. When microphones are live and the entire country is listening, the clip reached the internet before the hearing concluded. Someone in the press section had recorded it, focusing on Caroline's face as the words left her mouth. Within 30 minutes, "Go Back to Africa" was trending nationally. Hashtags multiplied, memes circulated, and the original video was shared, captioned, slowed down, and analyzed endlessly. Caroline's team recognized the crisis immediately. Her aide, a young man in a gray suit named Brian, walked quickly beside her as they left the chamber. "We need to claim it was misheard," he whispered urgently, shielding her from gathering cameras. "I mumbled," Caroline replied without stopping. "Nobody can be certain what I said." But she was mistaken. The audio was too clear, too harsh, too deliberate. You could hear the dismissiveness, the pause, the irritation behind it. They escaped into a staff corridor. Caroline checked her phone, already buzzing with messages from allies and party officials. Some expressed outrage, others warned her, but none defended her statement. A response needed immediate crafting. By the time her press team issued their first statement, Miss Leavitt was misquoted due to background interference and misinterpretation. She firmly opposes all forms of racism and prejudice. Public opinion had already formed. People weren't just angry, they were disappointed, not solely because of what was said, but because of how frequently such incidents occurred, followed by excuses, deflection, and public relations damage control. The pattern had become exhausting. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. Reporters followed her to the elevator. One asked, "Congresswoman, do you wish to respond to Miss Leavitt's remark?" She glanced at them, then pressed the elevator button. Her response was simple, "Not yet." That yet created something unusual. Her supporters called it dignified restraint. Her critics labeled it calculated performance. That evening, Jasmine wasn't rushing. She dined quietly at her hotel with her mother, who had traveled from Texarkana the previous day. They ate in silence initially. Then her mother said, "You're going to speak, aren't you, baby?" Jasmine gazed out the window at the flickering city lights beneath cloudy skies. "Yes," she said, but not what they're expecting. Elsewhere, Caroline couldn't sleep. She sat on her hotel bed, laptop open, watching cable news replay the clip repeatedly. Her phone buzzed with missed calls from party donors and former colleagues. People were already distancing themselves, some suggesting she remain quiet temporarily, others recommending a formal apology, but Caroline wasn't built for humility, not yet. "She misheard me," she repeated to herself. Brian, still seated across the room, didn't respond. He just watched her with concern, not judgment. This wasn't just about her career anymore. This moment transcended both women. And Caroline was beginning to understand she no longer controlled the narrative. But power shifts when least expected, and Jasmine was about to seize control in an unprecedented way. The next morning, the Capitol cafeteria was unusually quiet. Cameras lined the hallway outside the press room, cables snaking across the floor. Reporters sipped bitter coffee while monitoring their phones. Something was approaching. At exactly 10 o'clock. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett approached the podium alone. No entourage, no backdrop flags, no speechwriters nearby. Just her, a black folder in hand. And that same composure she'd displayed in the chamber. Cameras clicked as she took the microphone. She paused briefly, not too long, just enough for focus, then opened the folder, glanced at it, and closed it again. I was going to read something prepared, she said, but I don't think that's necessary. She leaned slightly into the microphone. What happened yesterday wasn't new to me. Her voice was steady, not trying to sound righteous or poetic. It simply was. Present, measured. I've been told to go back since I was a teenager waiting in line at a Shreveport store. Back then, it was an older woman who disliked how I looked her in the eye. I've heard it on airplanes, whispered in elevators, even in boardrooms, though more diplomatically phrased. So no, I wasn't shocked. She paused. Several reporters shifted uncomfortably. What shocked me, she continued, was that some people thought I should be shocked. Like this was the first time something like this had ever slipped out. Like this was some tragic accident in a world that usually operates on respect. That's not the country I've known. The room remained silent. No clicks now. No one dared interrupt. I want people to understand something, she said. When you tell someone to go back, you're not questioning their citizenship. You're questioning their belonging, their value, their place at the table. She looked directly into the camera, and I'm not going anywhere. There it was, the line that pierced through countless screens before the press conference even ended. It resonated in classrooms, barbershops, and front porches in towns that had never heard of Jasmine Crockett, but recognized that tone, that determination. She didn't cry or shout. She told a story. One year my father brought me to Washington, D.C. We stood outside the Supreme Court, and I remember him saying, "This building belongs to you too." I was 12, I didn't believe him. I still have days when I don't. She exhaled. But I came here anyway. I ran for office anyway. I occupy space here anyway. Not because I was invited, but because I knew I didn't need permission. Her words weren't polished in that speechwriter way. They were too sharp, too personal. I'm not here to shame Caroline Levitt, she said. I'm here to remind people watching that belonging doesn't have to be earned through perfection. We belong because we're human, because we wake up here, struggle here, build here, love here. We belong because our ancestors did the work that made this place even possible. She took a breath, letting the silence settle before her next sentence. And if that makes someone uncomfortable enough to say what she said, then maybe that discomfort is something they need to sit with, not me. The press conference ended without questions. She folded her folder, stepped away from the podium, and walked out as if she had more important things to do than argue, and she did. Her phone began ringing immediately. People crying, people cheering, even those from the opposite political side texting, "You said what I couldn't say aloud." But not everyone applauded, and some were preparing a backlash that would test everything Jasmine had just stood for. By midday, Jasmine's words had been clipped and shared across every major platform. Millions watched before lunch, many replaying it not because they missed it, but because they needed to feel it again. Across the country, people responded in ways rarely seen anymore, not in slogans or hashtags, but in stories. In voices. In a small diner outside Cleveland, an older black man named Reggie sat in his usual booth of 25 years. He leaned over his coffee and told the waitress, "I didn't know her name before this, but that woman has steel in her spine." In Phoenix, a Navajo high school teacher paused her lesson, played the video on the classroom projector, and let her students sit in silence. Then she said, "That's how you carry yourself when they try to tear you down." And in Sacramento, a retired white veteran named Bill posted on Facebook for the first time in 18 months, writing simply, "She spoke for more than just herself." But not everyone saw it that way. Conservative radio wasted no time spinning the narrative. One host in Denver barked into his microphone, "This is another orchestrated attempt to play victim, to divide us. She's grandstanding." Callers phoned in. Some agreed, others pushed back. "She didn't throw a tantrum," one caller said. "She told the truth. You don't like how it sounds. Maybe you should ask yourself why." Caroline remained silent. Her team released another statement, longer and more polished this time. It offered regret if her words were misunderstood, but stopped short of admitting anything. The internet tore it apart. That night, Caroline paced inside a borrowed townhouse in Arlington, windows closed, lights off. She watched the clip again. Jasmine's words, the poise, the quiet fire underneath. "She's winning this," she muttered under her breath. Her aide Brian nodded from across the kitchen. "You're not going to spin out of this. Not this one." "I didn't mean it like that," Carolyn whispered. It just slipped out. Brian leaned against the counter. That's the problem. Elsewhere, the impact continued growing. On a college campus in Minneapolis, students filled an auditorium meant for an unrelated panel. The event transformed into a discussion on identity, belonging, and who gets to feel at home in America. Jasmine's speech played on loop between speakers. In a barbershop in Atlanta, older men paused, mid-cut, to discuss how she handled herself. One man said, "Back in my day, you got loud or swung." She did neither. That takes more strength than people realize. But the weight of the moment was affecting Jasmine too. She sat alone in her apartment, lights dimmed, a glass of water in hand. She hadn't turned on the news. She didn't want to hear her name spoken by people who'd never experienced the kind of silence she maintained on that panel floor. Her phone buzzed with another message from an unexpected name, Senator Leah Drummond, a conservative from Oklahoma. The message was brief. That was powerful. "Would you meet?" Jasmine stared at the screen, not from shock but because the world suddenly felt heavier. Her words had shaken something loose. People were listening, and now people who had never sat across from her wanted to talk, but one person still hadn't spoken. And when she did, it would change the entire conversation's tone. The story didn't end in fireworks. Sometimes it's the stillness after the storm that lingers longest. But even stillness carries power if people are willing to sit with it and ask themselves what they're truly learning. What happened in that panel room wasn't just about a comment. It was about who we choose to be when tested. Jasmine didn't emerge with more fame. She emerged with more weight behind her voice. The kind that doesn't vanish when cameras shut off. And Caroline didn't become a villain. She became a mirror, forcing people to ask themselves, how many times have I said something in darkness I wouldn't say in light? This wasn't a story about scandal. It was a story about choice, a choice to speak up without screaming, to teach without shaming, to respond without reducing someone to their mistake. In a time when everyone's expected to choose sides, Jasmine chose something different. She chose clarity over noise, and that choice left an impression far deeper than outrage ever could. Some political moments fade quickly. This one didn't, because people don't forget when someone shows strength without cruelty. They remember the pause, the breath, the way someone stands when the floor shakes beneath them and they refuse to move. Maybe that's the lesson. You don't need to shout to leave your mark. You just need to be honest when it counts most.